You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, and thanks for showing up again to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. This is a show about how I and many others have hiked all or some or just a tiny part of the Appalachian and other long distance trails. I just want to clear up a bit of a misunderstanding from last week's show, pointed out to me by my buddy Glenn Hebert. He said that I'd told you that I'd had about 600 applicants for our new podcast with an over 50s woman. We've actually had 6. I was just trying to say that my overall unread emails had increased to 600 from the previous week. So if you thought you didn't stand a chance of getting selected, the odds have just risen dramatically. Sorry about any confusion. This week we have a newly minted Triple Crowner, Jason Bamboo Elwood. Jason was in my class of 2014 on the AT and was part of a really interesting and caring group of hikers, which he's going to tell you all about. By the way, each of the 3 segments today are quite long, so this is going to be a pretty long show. Jason's interview was boosted at the end by a very funny poop story that lasts about 8 minutes just by itself. So if you listen to this over breakfast, you may wish to save that bit until a little later. I was once criticised by a listener for laughing too much at my guests' jokes, but when you hear this, you'll entirely understand my laughter. It is hilarious. So if you don't like me laughing too much, you may want to miss it. We also catch up with another member of the class of 2019, Carlton Johnson. I messed up several contact details on the trail and totally lost contact with Carlton, so I was especially pleased when I was able to reconnect with him the other day. He has such a positivity that you should listen to him very closely. After Carlton, I have an announcement about a new show on the Hiking Radio Network, which I hope will be of particular interest to all the section hikers out there. Please hang around for that. Last, another chapter from Paul Stutzman's book, Hiking Through, where Paul sums up the joys, or in fact the lack of them, of sleeping in a shelter on the trail. So now, without wishing this to be a 2-hour show, let's get on and meet Jason Elwood, or Bamboo. So today we've got somebody who I met in 2014, but until we spoke just yesterday, I didn't tie the name to the person. This is Jason Elwood, or Bamboo. Hi Jason, how are you?
Yeah, doing good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. And when we spoke yesterday, I identified a guy that I remembered from your group at that time, a guy called Underwear, which is a great name, by the way. But I understand he's actually been hiking with you ever since. Is that right?
Yeah, we've hiked 3 long trails together.
Right. So you are now a recent Triple Crowner, with the 2014 AT hike being the first of those. When did you finish the other 2 legs of the Triple Crown?
Yeah, so we finished the Pacific Crest Trail in 2017,
right.
And then we just finished, the Continental Divide last week.
Oh, last week. Man, that is recent. I didn't realize it was quite as recent as that. So, and one of the things that it really is a recurring theme for me and a number of other people I've spoken to, when you complete these trails, you do feel quite accomplished. Do you feel accomplished, or have you had the chance to let it sink in yet and you're not, you're processing how you're feeling?
Yeah, it's funny you ask that. Yeah, I think I'm probably more of the latter. I don't know if it's completely sunk in yet. I think that the last couple miles, Unger and I were hiking together. I think, some of the sentimentality to it all kind of began to sink in a little bit, but then we kind of jumped off the trail and started celebrating with people. So, I think I'm still in that process.
But the sentimentality, I think, and we're going to come to your reasons for being there in a minute, but the sentimentality, I think, is one of those things to allow yourself to have. This is an achievement, and feeling sentimental about it I think it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah, it's really special too, because you share the journey with so many people, and we actually have been really privileged to end our hikes with relatively bigger groups of people.
Yes.
And just getting to have all that shared experience has been just pretty amazing.
Yeah. And frankly, the shared experience of an AT hike, having just done my own again and spent 1,700 miles, the last 1,700 miles with the same guy, I think I appreciated that more this time than I did last time, from the point of view that, sharing all those experiences together. Last time it was just the last 300 or 400 miles I shared with people. But really, to spend so much time with a bunch of different people, I think is a wonderful thing on the trail.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think it's what keeps a lot of people going, actually. It's been pretty amazing to see like that in each of our groups.
Yeah, totally. So let's go back to the AT in 2014. And I remember you guys. So tell us about what got you out there in the first place. What were you out there for?
Yeah, well, so I probably, like anybody, you have a number of major reasons why you're out there, but I think, certainly I was out there to hike the trail, wanted to, overcome a huge challenge, and, the AT is certainly that. But vocationally, I'm in ministry, I'm a missionary, and, our heart was to encourage and serve other hikers that we were journeying with, to help them achieve their dream of finishing the trail, of hiking the trail, and ultimately in our own lives to know God better and to make Him known somehow through that journey.
Yeah. So how did you get involved in the ministry in the first place? And then you did tell us a story which you can follow up with actually after that, about how you specifically got onto the AT. How did you become involved in ministry in the first place?
Well, I came to know Jesus when I was about 14. I jumped into youth, like helping with youth ministry at that age, done that for most of my life. But as far as missions work, my first real-time leading a missions trip, I was 19. I was about 2 weeks away from finishing my freshman year in college at Colorado Christian University. Uh-huh. And my RA walked into my room and just said, "Hey, what's your plan for the summer?" And my 19-year-old airtight plan was, "I'm going to hitchhike to Mexico and be an evangelist and share about Jesus with people." And he kind of laughed, admiring my heart, and said, "I've got a good friend, Randy, you should call up. He leads a missions organization. They'll be leading mission trips all summer. They'll be repairing homes in Appalachia with youth groups, and you'll be leading, rafting, rappelling, caving, rock climbing, and you'll be camping all summer. You'll love it." And I said, "All right." And I gave him a call, and 2 weeks later, I was headed to Tennessee.
Wow. So you've got the thing about you, which is the ministry thing, and you wanted to do whatever they wanted you to do, or were you quite not pliable, I don't mean that. I mean, were you quite receptive to the idea of doing that?
Oh, absolutely, I was. I mean, I think for me, and this happened later in life, this is kind of how I ended up on the Appalachian Trail. I just kind of had this desire in me. I really believe that God put there. I would start to set off in a direction, and I feel like God, more often than not, just kind of redirects my path, in a more productive and constructive way.
Because the first clue was the fact you went to repair houses in Appalachia, which is a good start.
Yeah.
Gets you towards it. But then something else happened, didn't you? You got into actually hiking the trail in quite a coincidental way, didn't you? Tell us about the events that actually got you on the trail itself.
Yeah. So, well, I'd worked I'd moved back to Salem, Oregon, after university, and I'd been doing youth ministry there for years, and volunteering in my church and event planning, and I loved it. And at the same time, I felt like God was prompting me to become a missionary, this heart of mine to really reach out and share Jesus with people. There was other ways to do it. And so all my students had kind of grown up and were young leaders now in the church. And I just felt like it was my time. And so, I got this idea that, I was to, just maybe leave my job, leave everything I was doing and start hiking trails around the world and sharing about Christ as I went. And I shared this with both my pastors, and both of them very quickly redirected me, just like before, to Youth with a Mission in Virginia, which was about to do what is known as a discipleship training school, where you take 3 months and you really get to know God well through lectures on the character and nature of God, through learning how to do intercession and worship and local outreach. And then the practicum for that is a 2-month outreach. And for me, was a 5.5-month outreach on the Appalachian Trail.
Nice. That is so nice. What a wonderful thing. And I saw you guys being. I think I remember you first at Graymore, the spiritual centre. Ironically, I guess. Where in fact the Von Trapps were there, and you ran into them quite a bit, didn't you? Remember the family with 5 people? Yeah, it was 3 kids and the mother and father, Damien and Renee, I think her name was.
Yep, absolutely. They're an amazing family. They're also Christians. And what ended up really being great, so on that journey, we started off the first half of the Appalachian Trail with 15 people on our team. Yeah. By halfway, there was only 3 of us still going. 2 of us were hiking and 1 was driving a support vehicle, and which we used to give out food to hikers and to shuttle hikers and just to be a resource. Well, the Von Trapps were kind of on a deadline because they had a visa only until the September 23rd. And so we ended up getting to actually help support them on their hike by being able to shuttle them, like whenever they would get into town quickly, back to town and then back to trail. And in turn, they actually helped us out because financially it was really hard for us to actually keep the van going. There's a lot of money. Sure. So it ended up being a great partnership. We became family with them and we finished the trail together. Wow, that's amazing, isn't it? That really is great. They were lovely people as well. And did you, once you got on the trail and did you start from Amicalola? I did. Several of my team did, and then most of my team started at Springer. Right. So you got on the trail, and there you were, and you started hiking. Because we've had spiritual people on the show before, and quite very religious people, and we had a pastor on there, a great guy called Kurt Ebert. Disciple, that's right, yes. And he was a wonderful man, and I always give my disclaimer that I personally don't believe in God, but I know that a lot of people on the trail perhaps are less receptive to hearing about God. But did you find that hikers were receptive to your mission and what you were trying to achieve on the trail, or did you really basically speak to people who were already involved with God? Well, actually, I would say all 3 trails, I would say the majority of people were very receptive to what we were doing. Largely, again, we set out to serve and encourage people in their journey. Right. And so I didn't feel like that was very hard to achieve, that part. Now, when it comes to maybe having a discussion with people, again, I think it's based on a relationship you have. And I think generally when you build trust, like in any relationship, there's room for dialogue, there's room for conversation. Quite agree. If we went out there with the intention of beating people over the head with something, then I don't think it would have gone well, but that's not what we did. Right. And so you start off by offering help to people, and I was aware of that at the time. And is that help done through the lens of God, or is that given willingly whether people want to talk about God or not? Yeah, I would say it's absolutely done willingly, whether people, sometimes it's kind of like, you've been to plenty of trail magics where you get to a trail magic and someone's got a lot of food out there, and some people, they stop and, they scarf their burger and they're gone, and then other people, they sit there for 2 hours, and hang out. I was the latter, by the way. Yeah. I think most of the time I was too, and so, we're happy to do it, it comes down to, am I here to serve hikers? And if the answer is yes, then for some hikers, they just got to keep going. And for other hikers, they want to stay and chat, and we're available for both. Right. There was actually one girl that reached out to me. I'm kind of blanking on her name right now, but in 2016, I took a team out and I had an abundance of Slim Jims. And she sent me a picture because she had said to me, I'll take as many Slim Jims as you can give me. I just kind of laughed and I'm like, oh, if you only knew. And I walked over and I grabbed probably, around 60 or 70 Slim Jims and I handed them to her. And she took every one of them. It's just years later, she sent me a picture. She's like, hey, do you remember me? These are my Slim Jims. Yeah, you remember through that. Yeah, obviously. So did you find the same attitude towards you on all the trails, or were there differences in how people approached you, or were you still doing the Triple Crown for the same purpose? Yeah, our purpose has been the same the whole time. I think, obviously you learn, trail by trail, sure, more about yourself and more about people. And, Yeah, so like the first trail, we had a couple of support vehicles that we were able to give lots of food out through. Pretty hard to finance. It's very expensive, actually, just paying for mileage up and down a trail. And so, yeah, the last two trails was actually just, Underwear and myself, hiking. But what we did strategically differently is we just reached out to friends, to other people in Youth with a Mission. Youth with a Mission is all over the world. So there's actually many bases, or locations or campuses in the United States.
Right.
And so we just did our best to partner and reach out, to others to come to the trail, to do trail magic, to host, to do cookouts. But I would say this last trail especially, one prayer that I had before the trail started was just that God would raise up other Christians that would come out that I didn't even know, and then would minister to those that I was hiking with.
Wow.
And I'm telling you, God answered in a miraculous way. And it's like time and time again, I just found myself like, I shouldn't be surprised. And yet every time even God surprises me, where I'm like, how could you, like, I'll tell you one brief story. It just, it very much characterizes this. So, I was I think we were down in Grants. And, we got into town and, everyone's kind of, drying out their tents, before they go, find wherever they're going to go. And we're sitting at this little park, and this man just walks up and he says, "Hey, can I give you a ride? Do you have you guys anywhere?" And at the time, we really didn't need a ride, and so at first I was like, "Oh, no, we're okay." And then a friend of mine, mentioned, "Yeah, I got to get a ride down to, somewhere that was, hundreds of miles away." And he, kind of was like, "Oh yeah, what do you need?" And my friend, his name's Strawman, he basically, had a growth on his face. And I guess he's had issues with, cancer, before, I believe. I hope I'm not saying that incorrectly, but he, and he's like, "Yeah, I can't get a hold of my dermatologist. I'm going to have to get off trail. I gotta get this looked at. This could be bad."
Sure.
And the man just looks at him and he's like, "Don't worry, I'll just cut that off for you." And I was just like, "What? What did he say?" And he was just like, "Oh no, it's okay. I'm a surgeon." Turns out he's the only surgeon, I believe, from what I understood, in that town. He's a Christian, and he basically said, "I can take care of that tomorrow, and you can be on the trail."
Oh my gosh!
And my strongman looks at me, and I look at him, and I'm like, "What?" So, and anyhow, he ended up, taking care of him. And that man also gave me a place to stay. He's been giving a lot of people places to stay. And Grant, I guess, over the last year, he's also a hiker, loves hikers a lot. But at the end of the day, his heart is to, love people as Jesus would, and to offer somebody surgery. I'm like, how does a surgeon just walk up to you?
That is amazing. That is, I must say, that is amazing, and I can't explain that. I can't explain that. I'm not even going to bother trying, Jason. But that's something. So you said that quite a few of you started out 15, and then you were whittled down to 3. Was that because they had to drop out for different reasons? They get injured, or how did you? I mean, because a successful through hike of the trail isn't an easy thing. Those who started didn't finish for a number of different reasons. What was the reason they dropped out, or was it just a matter of time for them?
Yeah, so good question. Yeah, so again, that particular outreach started off as kind of like, the practicum piece of a DTS, or discipleship training school.
Yeah. And
so basically, to graduate from the program, you needed to do 2 months of cross-cultural outreach, which hikers, I would say, are definitely their own culture.
You think?
They definitely have their own way of doing life. And so, most of them, I think, really would like to have, but financially, it was just, for most, it was very difficult. Some of them were staff, some of them were students. So really, at the end of the day, when it all boiled down, some got injured. There was 2 of us left that were ready to go and a place to continue to hike, and one who stayed to run a vehicle so that we can continue to minister to hikers the way we had been throughout the first part of the trail.
Right. Well, look, I can see why you're on it, and I saw at the time what kind guys you all were, and you were very helpful to people and just friendly, and frankly, that's all you kind of need to be to start a dialogue with anybody, isn't it? So I think that is certainly a nice way to do it. And I know you told me you felt your God sustained you on your journey, but you also said about the first shelter on the trail, then you asked God why He brought you there. How did you feel He responded?
Yeah, I mean, so are you talking about the AT, the
Well,
first trail?
yes, I'm talking the AT. Yeah, when you've got to that first shelter, you said, "Why have you brought me here?"
Yeah, you're right. I do. I remember getting to that shelter, and literally, I had just gotten a report that there was a tornado warning. I just sat there. I was like, "Okay, welcome to the trail. This is going to be your life for the next 5 or 6 months." Yeah, and I do. I remember sitting in that shelter alone. I had a little bit of time, and I just kind of looking at it, wondering about all the people that had come before me that had slept in that same place, endeavoring to do the same journey. And I remember asking, God, like, one thing I've learned about God is that no matter where he takes me, no matter what he takes me to do, he always wants to do something in me as well. Like, it's always both. Like, I'll go out on a mission trip for sometimes 5 months, and at the end, even though I feel like I get to do a lot or serve or to speak or to share or to love, I always look at myself and I see change. And so, yeah, I think I found myself going, God, this is a big journey. Like, what is it that you want me to do? And also, what is it that you want to do in me? Because that's really how a relationship with God works. Like, it's not just, hey, he gives you a task and says, hey, go do this. A lot of times he gives you a task because he wants to do something in you.
That's interesting to me. And this is a top of my head question for you, really. So
sure.
You'd never really done the long hikes before. So you did this and you got there to the end and you're now a Triple Crowner, which is an extraordinary achievement in itself. And so how have you seen God make changes in you? Or what have you recognized in yourself that has changed?
Wow. That could be a long list.
All right. Okay.
What are the top things?
I'm sorry. Are you different?
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you different because of the hike? And obviously,
I definitely smell different.
I think you do. Yeah, no question.
I would say we've kind of chatted about this before, but like, as a missionary, I don't have an income. I have friends and family that are dedicated to, like, helping support me monthly. When I first started my hike, I really didn't have a whole lot of that set up. So I would say that what God has shown me over and over again is, one, he will provide. It's not always in my timing. Like, I try to get everything set up in advance. And half the time he's just like, no, just show up in the town. Like, your needs are going to be met, and I think learning to trust him with my finances, learning to trust him with my safety. And I'm sure there's more we can talk about later as far as,
we're going to. There's one particular question. I've got for you.
Yeah. So we'll get to that later, I guess. But like, I have learned to trust him with my life. I have, I actually probably have a couple of, maybe you could say life and death stories that could have gone either way on the trail. And even ones I didn't share with you last time. Yeah. And I am convinced God will make my path straight. He'll open the door for me. He will guide my feet when I can't see. He'll protect me from unknown dangers. And even when I should be really, really hurt, he has kept me from injury. And
it's interesting. I admire that faith in anybody. I don't have it myself, but I admire that faith in anybody. And, the expression amongst hikers is the trail provides, but for you, God provides. And it's the same. It's the same thing in many ways, I'm sure. From people's own perspective, the trail provides or God provides. And I understand that. And it's interesting to me that the two experiences can be the same.
Yeah. Well, and so one thing that's kind of cool about God, like, his character nature is that he is provider. So whether, someone maybe attributes it or, to him or they don't, his heart is the same. Just like when, you asked me about, do some people, how do they receive, kind of what you share, and I'm like, I think it's kind of the same way, like, God is just like, I love all of you, whether you know me well or know me at all or don't know me at all. And so he's just like, I'm just going to provide. I'm just going to provide the things that you need before you even know that you need them. I just believe that I know that I need them and that he's the one that's providing it. Maybe that's the difference.
I admire that faith. Now, you told me that you have some random animal stories, and then you casually, almost as a throwaway remark, mentioned you had a fight with a mountain lion. So
yeah,
have at it. Have at it. Tell us about how that worked out.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. I'll try to pare it down a little bit just because there's a lot of different parts. But the short version, I think, is that ultimately my phone had stopped working. It was a nightmare for me. This was on the PCT in 2017. I'm not going to tell any more than that. But basically, my phone turned off after I left Sonora Pass.
Right.
Which, like after 5 miles, just turned off, never did turn on again.
Oh my gosh.
The first part of that stretch, like there were different times when I was able to kind of latch on and hike with somebody, but there were some big sections I was all alone. And the second to last day that I was in that section, I hiked about 29 miles in snow country, no map, no compass, no guide, nobody. And did my best to follow footprints. They would disappear. Anyhow, I was probably about 23, 24 miles in, and I ran into a day hiker, and they gave me some info on the pass coming up. I was chasing my crew because I was behind because it had been taking me a while, and so I decided I'm going to night hike. Not saying that's the wisest decision, but again, there's something about being alone out there with nothing that caused me to just lean upon God in a way that I never had before. I knew that if I made the wrong decision, the wrong turn, whatever, I could be in trouble. And I'm not encouraging this necessarily. And any other hiker out there, be safe.
No, I wouldn't.
Use your stuff. Find people. This was my experience. And so yet I felt like God was saying, journey with me, trust me, and I was like, okay. Sure. So I don't remember the name of the pass. It seems crazy. It's either Carson or Carter, and I don't recall. But I go over this pass. It's late. It's dark. I can't see. I have to glissade, kind of blind down for a while. I just have my headlamp. And I prayed dozens of times, God, would you just guide my path? Would you tell me left, right, where am I going? And every time he would answer and give me a new direction. And every time it was the right one. So I get to this snow field, and I think I should put on my crampons. And right as I'm about to do this, I look down in this ravine, and this pair of eyes, they look up at me. And you gotta, if you're hiking at night, you kind of just get used to seeing eyes. A lot of times it's deer and all sorts of, fairly, non-harmful creatures. And yet immediately the body lowered to the ground, like quickly. And then it just began beelining it up the hill.
Wow.
And all of a sudden it was like your heart I wish I could make the heartbeat sound, but it just starts thumping through my chest. And yep, exactly. I was never good with noises. And basically the thought goes through my head, you're about to fight for your life. So get ready. And I grab my axe, and I have bamboo poles. That's how I got my name originally. Made some, trekking poles out of bamboo because I didn't have enough money for real trekking poles. And so I decided, I'm going to fight. And I don't know, it was really that simple. It wasn't super complicated. But then I had this fleeting thought at the end that was like, you should try to hit it in the head with a rock. You might be able to hit it. Somehow there's literally only three rocks sitting probably 5 feet from me. I throw the first, I throw the second. I narrowly miss. The third one, somehow I hit it just square in the head. And it wasn't happy about it. And I can't make cat noises, so if you can help me out, go ahead. But, I don't know what
I can't do that now.
So it moves over about 25 feet, and my heart is just racing into my chest. I'm like, I cannot believe that worked. I'm shaking. And I just decide I'm crossing the snowfield. I'm not going to run because I don't want to be prey. And so I move slowly across the snowfield. I get to the other side. It's sitting at the far edge on the opposite side, the one I just left. And I spent the next 2 hours looking over my shoulder, terrified this thing was going to come after me.
Wow.
So I get to another snowfield. I get about 80% of the way across the snowfield, and I'm getting pretty close. There's bushes or something on the other side, trees. And all of a sudden these eyes open up right in my path. And my heart goes through my chest. I had to put it back in first. And then, I sat there for a moment, and I guess I see this kind of as an analogy to faith in many ways. And that I got to this point and I realized I can't go backward. I just can't do that. I didn't have the courage in me to walk backward from where I had come.
Sure.
And I knew it was foolish to stay where I was. And so finally, I made this simple decision. It was like, you know what? If I'm going to fight with this thing, I'm going to be the aggressor, and I'm going to charge those bushes right now. And trust me, I felt silly. I felt scared. I felt anything you would imagine in that moment. But I just decided this is the optimum decision. Like, I'm going to go into this fighting, and hopefully that's enough to scare it off. So I grabbed my axe, my bamboo, and I charged. And right when I got to the edge of the bushes, the animal takes off, disappears. I don't see it again. About an hour or two or whatever it was later, I don't exactly remember now, but I reached this ranger station. There's this big sign that says no camping. I was like, perfect. I will camp right here. Also, just to be clear, I'm not recommending this to anybody else, but in the circumstances, like, I kind of had enough at that point. I got under the awning and it started raining, but I'll tell you, like, trusting God meant something very different to me after I walked through that section than it had up to that point. And that
is some story. That is some story. It really is. And going back to the AT for a second. So because that was on the PCT.
For sure.
I wasn't quite sure I took these notes yesterday correctly. Did you say you summited Katahdin twice?
I sure did. Yeah.
Didn't you see it first time? What happened?
Yeah.
Well, I think I know what it was, actually.
We could barely see it the first time. We were actually pretty socked in. We had about, I don't know, probably 50-mile-per-hour winds the first time we went up. So it was a cold affair. We still managed to get a couple pictures and celebrate with people. But yeah, I actually stayed 2 days more and then resummited because Underwear, Mountain Light, and myself had a friend named Rowdy, who I believe at the time was 65 or pretty close to that. And he just became a dear friend of ours. And we wanted to just encourage him and cheer him on his hike. So we resummited on the same day with him.
Oh, cool. That is cool. You said he was a really good person. In fact, funny enough, I think you used him as an example because we talked about what it takes to complete a long-distance hike like the AT or indeed any of the others. What do you think it takes to complete? Now, for you, it's God. I understand that. But for people who maybe don't have that, what do you think what is the characteristic that really is needed to do these hikes?
Yeah. You know, I think when I first started, that reminds me, I think I shared when I first started the trail, there was a guy that made a comment about another hiker. And he just, on day one, he was just like, oh, they're not gonna make it, you know, and he listed a few reasons. And I remember at the time distinctly just disagreeing. I was kind of disappointed that was the position, but I think at the time, I think these words just kind of ring through my head, you know, like, it's like, if you want to complete a trail, you got to want it. Like, you really have to want it. And like, people ask me, did you ever think about quitting the trail? And I believe I'm answering honestly. And I'm like, no, there's not a day, there's not a moment where that ever really, you know, came into my mind, because for me, it's like, I know that I want to be out there. And I think anybody who's really going to succeed at anything, you kind of just have to, you gotta throw your whole self in and commit yourself and have a vision for finishing. And that means embracing all of the hardships and the downfalls and the injuries and the struggles and just the tough days when you just seems like you can't go, or it's too cold, or you're
like every other day.
Yeah, you know, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's very much like life. And I mean, even like, I think specifically on the 18, one of the hardest things for me was chafing. It just seems like a funny thing that you kind of work through or get past, but for some reason it was just terrible on that trail. And to walk 20 and 25 miles a day, knowing how much pain you're in. But when you have decided already, I want this. Like, I want this life. I want to do this and I want to succeed at it. I think that's what it takes. You got to know in deep inside you want this.
Yeah, I totally agree. As soon as you said that, I wrote it down straight away when I was thinking about it. That is it seems so obvious that you've got to want it, because why would anybody do it? But I don't think people realise the difference between wanting something and really wanting something.
Yeah,
and I think it has to be the thing. And my line was, it has to be the thing you want to do more than anything else this summer. You know, that whole time, that 6 months, you could be doing other things, but you've got to want to do that thing more than anything else.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And I think I've heard something like that before. And yeah, you do. If it's not the most important thing to you, eventually you will find a reason to walk away. You will get into a town for too long. You will start, I don't know, engaging, on too great a level with, something or someone somewhere else. But yeah, a lot of times people, even if when they leave a town, sometimes if it's kind of late in the day, the goal is just to get on trail. Because the next day you're going to wake up and you're just going to keep going. But you get stuck in town. People get stuck in town for long periods of time, and that can
we called it this year being sucked into the vortex.
Yeah, the vortex.
These people say that. Yeah. Now we're gonna end this now with you, because you told me you've got a really good poop story, and of course, no top class interview can be considered top class without a really good poop story. So knock yourself out. There's going to be no cursing in this because we don't have any cursing, obviously.
Yep, no cursing. Yeah,
a good poop story is what we're going for now. So tell us about yours.
Well, I've got a big one, and then I've got a very short, small one. So if we have time for the small one later, we'll get to it. But I can thank Underwear, particularly on the Continental Divide Trail, for finding a way to get me to share this probably over 30 times. The story goes, 2017, Tehachapi, for some reason, it was a town in California, a ton of people, dozens of people were coming into town and getting sick, like 2 to 3 day stomach issues, sick, and no one really knows why. It wasn't any particular eatery or anything like that, so I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. I ended up going out to a meal. I won't say where, just because I don't want to give them bad press.
Yeah, sure.
And I don't think it was them anyway. But anyhow, I was full, as full as you get, as hikers do. They come in, they gorge themselves, and you wait an hour and you do it again. So I had finished eating, and I was actually, I was eating at one location. I was staying. There's a barbecue place there that, I don't recall the name of, but they have teepees in their backyard that they allow hikers to stay in. And the backyard is fenced in. And just to give a little backdrop, there are signs up all over the backyard that say, smile, you're on camera. This will become important later.
I'm already working out where this is going.
Yeah. So anyhow, the restaurant, it closes at, 10 or 11 or something like that. And at that point, you don't have access to a bathroom. And there's really nowhere else in the city that you have access to a bathroom. So basically, you're kind of on your own. And so I wasn't feeling well. When you eat too much and you think, oh, is this going to digest, or is this going to be a problem in an hour? And so I was left wondering. There was a trail angel there that night that I kind of chatted with for a little bit. Eventually I went to bed not feeling well. My stomach was hurting, and I just had a feeling something was going to happen. So I wake up about 11 o'clock, and that moment when you realize something is just imminent.
Absolutely, yeah. And inevitable.
So, and I was like, this is going to happen now. So there's others sleeping in the teepee with me, and I tried to, sneak out as quickly as I could and quietly. And I ran across the yard, and I realized I'm going to hurl, and this is just going to happen. So I ran to the garbage can, and it, it's like, when you stand up and all of a sudden it's like, oh, now. So I ran. I have never released so much substance out of my mouth at any other point in my life. It was never as violent or as powerful as it was in that moment. And, I was somewhat relieved at the end. Sadly, I was a little too relieved. And I realized that in the process of throwing up, I had released a little more out the wrong end. And, you don't only carry so many clothes with you, on these trails. And so there I am. And then I realized that I was in an even worse situation than I thought. I was not done by a long shot. And I mean kind where you're sitting there and it's painful. And you're like, this cannot be contained for many more seconds, and all of a sudden I'm panicked. It's like, you're in the woods. You can at least go hide somewhere,
That's right.
And like,
I'm
sitting here in the backyard with some teepee folk in middle of the city, So I'm like, what do I do? And so I'm like, I can't go in the yard and teepee and the people, and this is going to be messy, and I'm already messy. So I ran outside the fence, and I think, oh, they've got to have a dumpster, that's got to be better than
that's what it's called a dumpster for. That's what it's called a dumpster for, isn't it?
Like, how apropos, So I opened the dumpster only to realize it was like it looked like a war zone in there. It was just all sorts of sharp and pointy and just oblong pieces of junk and garbage. And I'm like, man, if I get in there, it's gonna go all over me more than it is already.
Dear.
And so I'm like, man, this can't work. Then I'm like, there's a recycling bin. Not necessarily suggesting this, but desperate times, they call for desperate measures. And so I run over to the recycling bin. I open it up. It was pretty much just the same, but in box form. And so finally I'm like, all right, I cannot hold this any longer. So I'm like, I'll use a box. So I grab a box, and I'm like, novel idea. And I run back in the fence. And then I'm like, I'm at least going to go behind the teepees, maybe there's cameras, but at this point, there just comes a point you just stop caring. So
Absolutely, yeah.
I set the box down on the ground, and I took off all my clothes because I just anticipated I was going to need all my focus just to kind of contain things as things were. So I took off all my clothing, and I'm standing there, and the buff, and I, get into the squatting position. I'm ready to release. And all of a sudden, something just spooks me. And I look over, I realize there are 6 dark objects moving towards me, like feet away from me. And on my heart, I'm like, oh my gosh.
That would have made me go even more.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I was a little paralyzed at that moment. And so I didn't quite hit the release valve. And so I look and I realize, I think, oh my gosh, these are raccoons. Like, this is really dangerous. Like, you could get rabies and worse and whatnot.
So could they. It sounds like they come from you.
Yeah, no, I had that thought. Actually, it's just you said it. So I'm like, I've got to turn on my headlamp. I had it off, obviously, because I was trying to, be discreet. And I turned on my headlamp. It was worse than I imagined. I thought raccoons was the worst thing that I could imagine coming at me. There was 6 skunks walking right towards me, and I'm sitting here, hovering above a cardboard box in the middle of a backyard with cameras and people, and I'm naked, and I'm like, oh my God. So I was like, what do I do? It's like, either I commit right now or I run. I was like, spraying my skunk has to be worse than getting whatever I've got going on all over me. And so I ran, I ran, and the skunks were chasing me around the yard. And I'm just sitting there like, how could this happen? Like, who does this happen to? No one's ever going to believe this. I'm getting in my condition. And so I run away from them for a while. And eventually they lost interest. I don't know, but I was just grateful not to get sprayed. I knew that would be a far worse fate.
I'll tell you what, I would have had a few questions for my God at that point. He wasn't looking after you at that moment, was he?
I was like, someone's up there having a good chuckle. That's what went through my head. So I run back to the box. I did the best I could to, keep things contained. Yeah. And then I'm like, clean up. What do? I grabbed toilet paper. I grabbed my hand sanitizer. I tried to use them in concert with one another to clean me up.
God.
I was not going to put those shorts back on. There just comes up, every man has his limits, And so I was like, how do I sneak into this tent in my condition? So I wrapped a shirt around me, and then I snuck in. I had one pair of shorts, which I don't actually carry extra shorts now, but thankfully I did at the time. Put those on. I get back in the sleeping bag. I leave my dirty clothes outside. I go to sleep. This is the part that really, it gets bad. So I wake up about 4:30. And I have that distinct feeling. Things are not dry. And I realize I have lost it in my sleeping bag, in my liner, and my last pair of shorts, in the teepee, feet from all the other hikers. And I'm now in real trouble, and I still have to go. So again, we repeat the process, minus the skunks. Recycle bin, new box, backyard. And now I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I'm out of TP, I'm out of hand sanitizer, I'm lost. So I literally just paced around for a couple of hours until 6:37 in the morning. The owner of the restaurant or whoever opened it up comes in the backyard. He says, how you doing? And I'm like, oh man. And I had to put those same shorts back on too. That was the worst part. So I've been walking around in those things because I can't just walk around in the buff forever. Although some hikers disagree. And basically, I walk up and I'm like, sir, I don't know how to say this. I had a terrible night. all my shorts are soiled. I had some bad food, something. Do you have any wet wipes? Now, keep in mind, I mentioned this was a barbecue place. And in my mind, I was envisioning, wet wipes. He was like, oh, absolutely. He walks out with probably 30 of those tiny 1-inch little, wiper things they give you for your wing, your ribs. I'm just like, oh, you've got to be kidding.
Yeah, you got to be kidding me. That's never going to cover it.
Yeah, seriously. So I go in the bathroom. I did the best I could. Meanwhile, I texted my friend Underwear, and I was like, hey, man, dude, you gotta help me. I gave him the story. I'm like, I'm in trouble. Can you bring me some new clothes? Like, I don't even know how I'm going to get out of this place to get to a laundromat. Like, I'm like trapped to the bathroom right now. So he comes in about half an hour later, and he walks in. He's like, dude, I got you. I was like, oh, thank you. And then he pulls out a T-shirt. And I just look at him like, bro, where are the shorts? He's like, oh, this is all I could get. He just kind of laughed at me, and I was like, oh, this is my life. So I reached out earlier that morning to a man, the trail ranger from the night before. He had said he'd come down. Well, 20 minutes later, another man walks in. Yeah, and I was like, man, this guy looks a lot different than he did the night before. And he's like, Bamboo here? And I was like, yeah, I'm right here. He's like, you got some issues, huh? And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm a middle-aged man, and I poop my pants. Yes, it's true. Can we move forward with this? And he's like, yeah, go ahead and just, hop in the car. We're going to take you home. We'll get you hosed off at the house. And I truly believe that's what he meant. So we get in the car. This will be the last moment that I share, but he gets in the car, small car. My friend Underwear, he gets in the car, and then I get in the car. I close the door. And there's that moment when you realize that we're all trapped in here. And he just kind of looks at me. He just chuckles, and he's like, boy, you're a pungent fellow, aren't you?
Oh,
I was like, so I got to his house. His wife's there. And she's like, oh, you're the hiker. And I'm like, yep, it's me. I'm the one. And anyhow, they were amazing people. I've stayed in good contact with them. They've encouraged me on all my hikes, and they still are cheering for me this day. So yeah,
I bet they are. I was, good for you for telling that story, because it doesn't reflect great on anybody, does it?
So, yeah, no, I don't think so.
You did it, and it happened to you. But look, I've thought about chatting with you overnight and the things I would ask you, and I was going to, not so much I was going to gloss over the ministry side, but I found it so interesting that you talked about it in the way that you did. So I hope people appreciate, this conversation has been longer than most of the conversations we have. I think it's important to have some context for why you're out there, and and I admire what you're doing. I really do, and people I remember liking, really enjoying the company of you guys, and how you weren't pushing yourself forward on people. You were just being people, helping other people. And man, that's as good as life gets, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an honor, and I want to give credit where it's due too. There's so many people walking the trail, like this that have loved on us, and we've gotten to love on them. But yeah, at the end of the day, the one that compels me to do it certainly is God in my life.
Well, you reap what you sow, don't you? So being kind to people is what Jesus was supposed to do, and that's what we're supposed to do. So I might, and I really appreciate you talking to me. Yeah,
thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
Not at all.
It's been awesome.
Well, take it easy, and hopefully we'll talk again one day, because you've got a lot of stories to tell, I know, and this was just one show, so we'll talk again sometime. Yeah, I'm sure. Definitely. Okay, buddy. Well, look, you take it easy, all right? And hopefully we'll talk again.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.
You've got to admit it, that was funny. And what about the mountain lion? I think that might have brought on another poop story if it had happened to me. Seriously, though, what a kind and caring guy Jason, and indeed all of his mission friends were, and are. I totally respect his faith and, frankly, see it being used in a far more positive way than I do in many others. So kudos to Jason and his buddies. Now, for another shot in the arm of positivity, let's catch up with Carlton Johnson. The last time we spoke, he had reached the NOC. Let's hear what happened to him and the takeaways that he had from the trail. Here's Carlton. Well, we've got Carlton Johnson on the phone now. Hi, Carlton. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Well, I'm glad you're doing well because I was actually re-listening to our conversation last time, and I'd forgotten you were the one who actually, when you tried this in 2016, you broke your leg and walked 270 miles with a broken leg. I assume nothing quite so dramatic happened this time. Is that correct?
That's right. No injuries this time, and really overall had a really great experience. Did about 880 miles, right. And decided to get off the trail. They say you should never get off trail when you're going uphill. You should never make that decision when you're going uphill, yeah. Or if it's a rainy day, you shouldn't do it, or if you're in town, you shouldn't make that decision. And it was none of those things. I just felt that I needed to get off. It was just sort of an overwhelming deal. I know it sounds sort of bizarre, but I am a man of faith, and it just something told me I needed to get off the trail. And since I got off the trail, I have 6 kids, and to be quite frank with you, they've needed me. Nothing really dramatic, but it was just good that I was there, and it wasn't just one of them. So I felt I made the right decision for now, but I had a great experience. It was a great hike.
Well, I'd love to look at that a bit more then. So you had this feeling that I guess God was talking to you and said you need to get off. But was this a sudden thing, or was it something accumulating over a number of days that you were thinking to yourself, I think I'm nearly over here? Well,
when I walked into Waynesboro, I was starting to feel that way. That's about 860 some miles in, right. And I kept fighting that, and my kids came and actually visited me. I stayed a few days in Waynesboro, and everything was good. And a friend of mine came, and a childhood friend, have been friends for a lifetime, came and visited me, and I decided, I felt pretty renewed, and it was going to move on. So I skipped ahead up to Harper's Ferry, which is about over 100 miles. Skipped ahead because I knew I could come back and do that.
Sure.
And just to give me more time to make it to Katahdin before winter stopped me.
Right.
So I went to Harper's Ferry and did another 18 miles, and all of a sudden I just I just had that that's when it really hit me hard. I'm like, it's the terrain's good, it's not steep, it's good walking.
From there, yeah.
I mean, it couldn't be any better. It doesn't get any better than that. But I just felt like I had to. So I got to Boonesboro, Maryland, and called my son, he lives about an hour and a half, 2 hours away, and asked him to come get me. It was sort of odd because he had been so resistant for me to hike. He didn't like the idea of me hiking,
right.
But he all but begged me not to do it.
Wow, how interesting. So they were vicariously living through you, I'm sure, on your journey, and really excited by the fact you were doing so well. So he changed around by then. Had he wanted you to keep at it, did he?
He did, and we talked, and but he agreed to come get me, and I spent this was July the 3rd, so I spent the 4th of July with him and his wife, and
nice.
and my granddaughter, and but since then, I mean, like I said, it's nothing dramatic. It's not like they had some horrible things happen to them, but I was certainly needed, and right now it's sort of ongoing. It's just sort of some transitional period just for some of my kids.
Sure.
And pretty close to them, and I'm just happy I'm here, and so I have no regrets. And I'm gonna tell you, it was a great experience, and I learned so much each hike. You learn what to do, what not to do, and
sure.
Met a lot of great people.
Especially doing over 800 miles, you really have a massive hike. That is a real long distance hike anyway. So 800 miles. You've been on the trail for about, I guess, 3 months, nearly 4 months by then, hadn't you? Was it 3 or 4 months?
Yes, that's
something
correct.
Like that. Yeah, and so if you've learned how to manage your time on the trail, and you get into a routine, don't you, that really works for you?
Yeah, and it was a great hike. It was a great experience, and it's sort of one of these addictive things. I know I'll be back on the trail. I mean, health, as long as my health allows me to. I mean, it's just sort of a thing you don't get over. I know I'll be back on the trail, and that sort of makes me happy. I mean, it's not like this is over. This is just a little reprieve from hiking right now, but it gets in your blood to the point where I just can't, unless I physically can't do it, I just could never imagine not doing it again. And really, once again, I'm off the trail, and all I think about is the trail. So.
Isn't that funny? I've often wondered this, when people get off the trail, they make a decision to leave and they go home, they either don't regret it or they do regret it. How did you feel in those next 2 or 3 days, this 4th of July? Obviously that's different, you're celebrating America's birthday, but say the 5th and 6th of July, did you start to second guess yourself, or were you quite comfortable straight away with your decision?
I was comfortable with it, and part of it, I try to put things in perspective, and I'm like, what other activity could you walk 880 miles and feel like you failed?
You don't feel that, though. You can't feel that, can you? You don't feel that.
No, I don't. And that's what I was telling myself. I said, this is ridiculous. I said, there's no, it's quite an accomplishment. So that's what I was telling myself. It's ridiculous to feel like this was a failure. This was a great adventure.
Yeah.
I didn't, when you have lofty goals, even if you fall short, it's still great. And so I have no regrets whatsoever. Since 2014, I've hiked 1,400 miles.
Wow, amazing.
Over different times.
Yeah.
And one of the things I like is each time I learn so much as to what to do, what not to do.
Right.
One of the things I plan on doing when I go back out again is to go stoveless, just to save weight. Because as you know, weight is everything as far as enjoying yourself. Sure. And so now I'm taking the time to experiment with cold soaking, and each day I incorporate more and more of how I would eat on the trail to see what I can, what's sustainable. Like, could I stand eating this food over a period of time? And it's a fun activity to do when you're in the grocery store. Well, maybe I'll try this and I'll try that. And you got the safety of bailing out if it doesn't work,
It's funny. I consider going stoveless this time myself, but I'm still glad I had a hot breakfast and hot coffee in the morning, because my hiking partner did the same. So if your hiking partner is going to have breakfast, you might as well have breakfast yourself. And so I enjoy that part of it. So last time you walked, say, about 3 months with a broken leg, which is kind of bizarre. How was your leg this time? Or is it completely healed?
Yes, absolutely. I was feeling good the whole hike as far as physically. I just kept getting stronger and stronger. And, it's such a healthy activity. Actually, I ended up with less pain this time. The aches and pains, the old man pains, I call them, virtually disappeared.
Yeah.
The longer I hiked, the stronger I got and the less pain I had.
Wow. Any problem with knees or anything like that?
No. Like I said, it was more of a cure for me.
Yeah.
Than a detriment. I was actually, I was like, gosh, this is like curing a lot of the ills that I had. And eventually I just didn't have any aches and pains. And, I've read an article that not exercising and just sitting around is the new smoking.
I totally agree. Us old guys rock, I tell you. Those of us who get out on the trail, the fact that I have day-to-day pains when I'm not hiking. And when I got out there, you turn into a physical beast, don't you?
Well, you really do, and it's. I think that's part of the addiction is that those endorphins. You get addicted to those endorphins that you get, hiking 11, 12 hours a day, and then everything you do is an effort. Even sleeping, you have to set up your tent and take it down, and it's just. I can't recommend it enough to folks, and just the mental part of it. It's a very Zen thing to do, and it's just good for you all the way around. Once you could get hurt doing anything, and I did. I got injured at one point, but not this hike. And as far as safety, I always try to tell people. They go, "Oh my goodness, how can you hike by yourself? Aren't you afraid?" And I'm like, look, it's much more dangerous for me to drive to the grocery store. I mean, 100 times more dangerous than hiking. Yes,
it is. There's no question. And you were a cop as well, weren't you? In your which you retired from. So to having been
Correct.
law enforcement, you saw tough danger, but being on the trail is not generally a dangerous place to be. So I'm glad you reinforced that message. And did you forge many great friendships? Did you hike with a bunch of people, or were you generally by yourself?
No, I always tell people, and as you know, 3 million people a year use the Appalachian Trail. I always laugh when they say, "Did you hike alone?" I said, "Well, if you hiking with 3 million other people is hiking alone, I guess I did." But I said it's a very social trail, and I met a lot of great people and a lot of really great young people, which really renews my faith in humanity.
Me too.
And,
Me too.
They're just great. I'm talking about some real in-depth conversations and really good attitudes, and just nice young people. I mean, they were so respectful and embraced me and included me. It's just a wonderful community.
Yeah, and that's another great message to share with people. I know one or two people of our age do worry about whether we'd mix in and so on, but really, you're just embraced by everybody out there. And I found that this year as well, and I think it's something that needs reinforcing all the time. So you say you're going to go back at some stage. Any plans going forward in the next couple of years, or are you going to leave it a little while and just see how you feel?
I'm just sort of playing it by ear right now. I think this time, though, I will start back where I dropped off.
Sure.
I'm not going to redo the 880 miles. No. And the way I look at it, I'll start where I dropped off and finish. And then if I decide, I could still flip-flop and do the whole thing again.
That's the thing. I can tell you, you're like me. I'm constantly thinking about this. I'm thinking about going again. I can't believe I'm so even considering it, but the thought of not ever doing this again is not sitting well with me. I'm surprised how it's not. I thought when I got off the trail this time, I think, okay, I'm done now. But really, I'm not. I know I'm not. So I will definitely go back at some stage. Whether it's to do a full through hike or not, I don't know. But I enjoyed it so much. And I'm so pleased that you enjoyed it as well and that you were happy to come back and share your story with us, Carlton. And please let me know if you decide, when you decide to go again. I'll just let everybody know and we can chat again.
Yeah, I sure will. And thank you. And I wanted to say congratulations on your second through hike. I'm so excited for you. And I did follow you and quite an accomplishment.
I appreciate it, man. They're so good to talk to you. All right. You take it easy, all right?
You too.
Cheers. Bye. I told you, didn't I? Such a positive attitude and some really insightful comments from Carlton. What a guy. I so wish I'd been able to talk to him more on the trail. I hope he gets back on it and keeps us up to date where he is. Now, let's talk about our new show. I've been aware for several years that the true heroes of the backpacking world aren't us, the thru hikers, but our brothers and sisters who, either out of choice or necessity, hike the AT and other trails in sections. We've had several guests on the show who've done that. They have to start from scratch each and every time, often gaining their hiker legs just as they have to return home. I cannot imagine how difficult that would be. But because there are so many section hikers around, I thought I'd like to offer them their own show. One of my earlier guests was a woman named Julie Gayhart, or Jester. Julie came out to hike with me for a day this year and we got on immediately. I love her. She's funny, she knows what she's talking about, and she's genuinely interested in people and their stories. So I asked Julie if she would consider taking on this show, and to my delight, she immediately said yes. We probably won't be starting it for a couple of months, but I wanted to give you the heads up as Julie is currently looking for guests on her show. She already has 9 or 10 interviews lined up. She'll be adding a gear component to her show, and we hope to be able to give you some exciting news about that going forward. For now, though, we're looking for more potential interviewees. So please email Julie at jesternc, which stands for North Carolina, I think, 2212, jesternc2212 at gmail.com. Or you can just email me at steve@hikingradionetwork.com. One more thing. I've heard section hikers refer to themselves as just a section hiker. And in fact, there is a friend of the show who signs his emails as Jash, just a section hiker. Given Julie's trail name of Jester, we couldn't help ourselves, and we're calling a new show Jester Section Hiker. Hope you like it. Finally, we've got Chapter 6 of Paul Stutzman's Hiking Through, where Paul pushes on through Georgia into North Carolina and experiences a night that we've all had on the trail. A night in a noisy, snoring, stinky shelter. I'll see you next time. Chapter 6. A cold, rainy, miserable mess. Out of sheer exhaustion, I slept most of that night. The hoot birds woke me several times, but they were not sitting on every corner of my tent this time. They screeched their conversations somewhere off in the distance. Marathon Man and I were first out of camp, a routine we continued throughout our days of hiking together. In accounting terms, we were both LIFOs. Last in, first out was a hiking style that suited us both. We walked into a wild battle between man and the elements. It was not a good day in the woods. Heavy morning fog was our mildest adversary. As we climbed the highest elevation of the day, Levelland Mountain, at 3942 feet, high winds brought rain that changed to stinging sleet. For the next 10 miles we struggled against battering winds and rain mixed with ice. We were blown over several other mountains, finding brief respite only in the gaps between. We crossed mountains Cow Rock, Wildcat and Poor, and cut through gaps Tesnatee, wide and low. Visibility was at best only 50 feet. We saw the trail underfoot, but could only assume we had indeed climbed those mountains and threaded the gaps. There were no morning breaks. Stopping would only allow cold and misery to overtake us. Shortly after noon, we reached Low Gap Shelter and gratefully stopped for a rest and a snack and a chance to filter more water. The shelter protected us from the rain and sleet, but the howling wind blew cold blasts through the front opening, extinguishing any hope of warmth. The wind also blew in Sailor and Lion King. All of us were weary of the battle, so we agreed to hike just a few more hours, then set up camp and take refuge for the night. Before leaving the shelter, I put on every article of clothing in my bag, hoping for more insulation. We climbed no more big mountains in the afternoon, but several more hours of wind, rain and sleet exhausted us more than any climb. At 5 o'clock, we stumbled into a small clearing near Red Clay Gap and set up camp in record time. By 6, we were all in for the night. On a day when most intelligent people stayed inside, we had covered 15 difficult miles. I peeled off layers of wet clothes and welcomed the warmth of my sleeping bag. My tent refuge was comforting. I was dry and safe from the storm raging outside, and the presence of my 3 fellow hikers allayed the fears that surely would have prowled through my night if I had been alone. The rain pounded most of the night, but I had the best rest since taking to the trail, probably because the night was so miserable that even the owls stayed indoors. Lion King was not so fortunate and spent another night fighting the elements trying to invade his tent. He was also suffering from a worsening cold. The morning brought more rain with no let-up in sight. Our first substantial climb was 4,025 feet over Blue Mountain, followed by a 1.4-mile downhill slide to Unicoi Gap. The trail was now a wet and slick obstacle course, with every rock and root the enemy. Staying upright was a challenge, and my hiking poles saved me countless times when I slipped on wet leaves. Marathon Man hiked without poles, and though he did an incredible balancing act, nature often won, and a loud thump announced another wipeout. We reached Unicoi Gap without breaking any bones. Here, the trail crossed Georgia Route 75. The town of Hiawassee was 11 miles west. Lion King decided that he must get off the trail and buy new equipment if he had any hope of continuing his hike. He planned to hitchhike to Hiawassee, get a motel room and take time to recover from his cold, and then find a ride back to Neal's Gap to buy a better tent and backpack. We could either join him or move on without him. Apparently, Sailor, Marathon Man and I had not yet had enough misery. We opted to continue on, confident that Lion King would catch up with us soon, but we never saw him again. Several days later, a hiker passed us and in conversation told us about the 70-year-old he had encountered in Hiawassee. They had met in town and split the cost of a motel room. He reported that Lion King had new equipment but was staying in town a little longer to wait out the rain. Unfortunately, 2008 was one of the wettest years in Appalachian Trail history, so, for all I know, my friend may still be in the motel in Hiawassee, waiting for the rain to stop. I had enjoyed my time with Lion King. We shared conversations about life and death and missing our spouses. I can only wish for him the peace and healing I found on my journey north. Our group was now reduced to 3. Marathon Man, our new leader, was 63 and defied every description of a hiker. He hiked without poles, had a pack made in 1969 and travelled in blue jeans. He was oblivious to modern technology, but he was in great shape and that seemed to compensate for everything else. 70 marathons had prepared Marathon Man for this rigorous hike. He had finished one just before starting the AT. Sailor had marathon background too. He had speedwalked the Chicago Marathon. Sailor became our anchor man. I trudged in the middle. Both of them had been Boy Scouts too, so they knew how to tie those knots to hang our bear bags. The only knot I could tie was in my shoes, since my boyhood church had frowned on joining such worldly groups as the Scouts or 4-H clubs. There I was, apostle, hiking between 2 adult Boy Scouts. Me, an out-of-shape restaurant manager who couldn't tie knots, being pushed and pulled over these mountains by a marathon runner and a speedwalker. I was well aware that any time they chose, the other 2 could hike away and leave me to my own pathetic camping skills. But they allowed me to hang around, and because of their patience and my stubbornness, I ended up covering miles much faster than I thought possible. We climbed high and then slid downward, climbed and slid all day. After Blue Mountain, Rocky Mountain was a 1.3 mile climb followed by a 1.2 mile descent to Indian Grave Gap. We climbed and slid over several lesser obstacles and then faced Tray Mountain and a 2.5 mile uphill struggle to the highest elevation of our day. Shortly before we reached the summit, we came upon a wonderful sight. A local Boy Scout troop had parked a small camper beside the trail and offered hot chicken noodle soup and lemonade to hikers. But there were no Boy Scouts in sight. We couldn't blame them in this horrible weather. We served ourselves and took stock of our day. It was early afternoon and we had slipped, staggered and stumbled close to 10 miles. Should we set up our tents and avoid more punishment, or keep fighting the wind and rain to make more miles? 7 more miles would bring us to Deep Gap Shelter. The name itself appealed to us. We envisaged a refuge deep between the hills where the wind could not reach us. It seemed like the right choice, and we were fortified by the chicken soup. We crossed a 3-mile ridge crest called the Swag of the Blue Ridge. Under normal conditions, this would have been an easy walk with little elevation gain or loss. That day, we were battered by strong winds and blowing rain as we struggled across the ridge. After that, Kelly Knob almost stopped me. At 4,275 feet, the climb was so steep and slippery that at times I thought I could go no further. Mercifully, that was the last mountain of the day. We fell into Deep Gap Shelter around 6 o'clock. In 10 hours of nasty weather, we had hiked 17 miles. We were either true hikers or we were idiots. I'd never been this exhausted or gasped and wheezed so much in my life as I did in my climbs that day. Somewhere on the trail, perhaps on that wet and slippery day, I started a habit that stayed with me all the way to Mount Katahdin. When I slipped or stumbled, but recovered without falling or twisting my ankle or breaking a limb, I heard myself say aloud, "Thank you, God," or "Thank you, Jesus." That day, I was probably thanking the good Lord all day long. All my life I had been taught it was possible to communicate with God. But was that reality? Did he have a hand in what was going on in this world? Where was he while Mary suffered through those years of cancer and then died? Was there a reason God took her away from me, or did it just happen? Of course I prayed. Don't most people pray in some way, on some level? And yes, I truly believed that God had said he would be with me on this trail, but I wanted more. I needed to know if God was who he said he was. Are you in control of events, God, or do things on this earth just happen randomly? I wanted to know. If it was true that humans could communicate with the deity, then I determined to talk with God on this hike as if he were trudging along beside me. Deep Gap Shelter is a relatively new structure and has 4 walls instead of 3, with an opening about 5 feet wide in the front wall. This meant no rain or wind would blow in during the night. We could spend the night within the protection of a roof and 4 walls, rather than fight the wind to set up tents in the rain. I anticipated the new experience. This will be great, I thought, my first night in a shelter. I picked a spot in the corner furthest from the front opening and emptied my backpack. Before shedding my rain gear, I made one final trip out into the rain to filter several litres of water. Back inside, I stripped down to my Patagonia long johns. In several minutes, I had a pouch of cooked spaghetti ready to eat, but was so exhausted I didn't have much of an appetite. I ate only half and gave the other half to a grateful hiker across the floor. Other hikers had arrived. It would be a full house tonight. Several of the men were section hikers with a church group. I met many section hikers on my way to Maine. Some come back year after year, each year hiking a different section of the AT. A few section hikers actually cover the entire trail in this way. Some, like the men's church group at Deep Gap Shelter that night, are only out for a few days to enjoy nature and hiking camaraderie. 10 of us filled the lower floor and another 4 hikers took the upper loft several feet above me. It was 7 o'clock and the start of one of the worst nights of my life. I was uncomfortable the minute I wiggled into my sleeping bag. My Patagonia underwear was still moist from my perspiring on the difficult climbs of the day. None of my clothing was dry, so I squirmed out of the damp underwear and now lay in my sleeping bag naked as the day I was born. Some folks may prefer to sleep this way, but not me. It was most uncomfortable. I could not ignore another irritation. During my shower at Neal's Gap, I'd felt a stinging sensation in the groin area when water hit my skin. Now my skin was on fire. I'd read about hikers' problems with chafing, but never imagined how severe this problem can be. Chafing, caused by clothing rubbing against sweaty skin, is a painful fact of the trail. Most long-distance hikers, both male and female, will have to contend with it. I met hikers who actually had to leave the trail for days because they were suffering so much. Chafing can be prevented or minimised by wearing tight-fitting clothes and applying a cream before hiking. Some men wear a kilt so air can then move freely through the area in question. I do grudgingly admire an outdoorsman who is willing to wear a skirt to avoid this pain. If you can't prevent chafing by cream or kilt, the only balm for the itchy pain is to dry the area and keep it dry. I came up with a plan to dry my medical emergency. For the next hour, I pushed up my sleeping bag with both legs and both arms, then released it, up, down, up, down, up, down. And it worked. Like a giant bellows, I created enough air movement to dry out the chafed area. Alas, the air movement also brought to the surface all the aromas trapped in the heavy sleeping bag, body odours and the smell of wet feathers from the moist down filling. Lying on the floor in the corner of a crowded shelter, enveloped in repulsive stink, I admitted it to myself. For the first time, I regretted quitting my job in exchange for this misery. In the loft, I heard Sailor echo my own thoughts, lamenting to someone that this hike was not what he had signed up for. He thought he was taking a spring hike. He never expected this cold, rainy, miserable mess. For several hours I tried to sleep with no success. I was so tired I could not relax. I couldn't get comfortable on the hard floor. Sleep was not coming any time soon. My watch said it was only 11 o'clock. 4 miserable hours in this stinking bag, and sleep was no closer. Just try to shut down your mind, I told myself. You have to get some rest. But I'm naked and stinking and uncomfortable, complained another part of my brain. My conversation with myself was interrupted by a horrible sound nearby. Wow, flump, wow, flump. The sound was coming from a church hiker. The man sounded like he was dying, giving out a horrible guttural wheezing. How could he sleep through it? Soon the man beside him joined in and chainsawed through the night. Occasionally the first snorer gasped in mid-rattle, and I thought maybe he had indeed passed away, but then, wow, flump, and the song started again. From the upstairs loft, a third voice joined the choir, a high-pitched tenor snore. Sleep was impossible. A persistent cough peppered the snore chorus. One hiker coughed for 30 minutes, then thought to remedy his condition by standing in the doorway for a smoke. The smoke was not as irritating as expected, since it helped mask another aroma that now wafted through the crowded room. In hospitable brilliance, the leader of the church group had prepared a large pot of Western chili bean soup, and the group had shared it with the rest of the hikers. I had thought the night could not possibly get worse, but it did. The natural gas production began. Nearly every sound a human body could make emanated from Deep Gap Shelter that night, and there was nothing I could do except wait out this night of misery and plan to escape at the first light of day. My journal entry the next day noted, I would have welcomed a bear eating me. At 7 in the morning we had enough visibility to gather our things and hike out into fresh air, and more rain. Yesterday I would never have imagined that being out in the downpour once again would be such a relief. We set out in anticipation of the next highway crossing the trail. At Dix Creek Gap, the 80 intersects with US 76, and our guidebook showed a famed hostel just down the road. Everyone on the trail spoke highly of the Blueberry Patch, a Christian ministry run by Gary and Lenny Petit. We desperately needed time to dry our gear. My shoes were soaked. The choice of hiking shoes is one of the most important decisions a thru hiker makes. At one time, almost everyone wore some form of hiking boot. This is no longer true. Today, many hikers wear a lightweight hiking shoe. I had chosen New Balance 950 Gore-Tex shoes. The Gore-Tex is supposedly waterproof, but most thru hikers find it necessary to stomp through places that will soak any shoe. The Gore-Tex shoes stay dry longer than most, but when they get wet, they also take longer to dry. Many hikers I met had problems with shoes. One went through 5 pair. I used 2 pair. The first pair survived until we reached Harper's Ferry, where I then switched to the other shoes. The second pair was pretty much destroyed in New Hampshire and Maine, when monsoon season turned my last 400 miles into a muddy quagmire. Before we reached Dix Creek Gap, we crossed Powell Mountain, where the elevation allowed my cell phone signal to reach Blueberry Patch Hostel. I made reservations and arrangements to be picked up at a road crossing. In several hours we were at the hostel, drying out. While we took hot showers, Lenny did our laundry. I noticed an odd contraption with 2 upside-down legs and protruding feet. A shoe dryer. I cannot describe how good it felt to have warm, clean clothes and dry shoes. In a short time we had moved from the outhouse to the penthouse. This happened many times on my hike. When I was discouraged and miserable, a kind deed came around the corner to lift my spirits. The Blueberry Patch folks don't beat anyone over the head with scripture or theology. Gary and Lenny just live their belief, and their living speaks loud and clear. The next day we'd leave Georgia and enter North Carolina. I had hiked 6 days and 68 miles. 5.5 of those days we had hiked in rain, but for now I was safe and dry at the Blueberry Patch. Gary even allowed me use of his car that afternoon. I took a group of hikers to Daniel's Steakhouse in Hiawassee, where we indulged in the first AYCE buffet of our hike. AYCE is the trail acronym for All You Can Eat. And did we ever eat? I discovered that on the trail I could eat any time and any amount I wanted and never gain weight. I spent the night in the hostel bunkhouse in conditions I previously would have considered primitive. Now I thought my accommodations luxurious, and I fell into a good night's rest. An 8 o'clock bell announced breakfast at the main house, a feast of pancakes, sausage and eggs. Oh boy, this day was starting out right. And could it be possible? The rain had stopped. Before leaving, I took a quick look through the hiker box. Every hostel has one of these treasure boxes. Hikers put extra or unwanted food, gear, books, anything you can imagine, into a community box. I met one man who outfitted himself with whatever he found there, living on the trail from one hiker box to the next. Reluctantly, we took leave of the Blueberry Patch and were driven back to the trailhead at Dix Creek Gap. Several big climbs awaited us that day, but we also knew we would leave Georgia and move into our next state. 9 miles later, we spotted a small metal sign on a tree telling us we were at the Georgia-North Carolina state line. 1 state down, 13 to go. In the Nantahala National Forest at Bly Gap, a gnarled oak tree welcomed us to North Carolina. The twisted tree trunk appears to recline, branches reaching upward as if begging for help, in a pose so unusual that it is a much photographed landmark on the AT. We lay on our backs by the tree and took a break, celebrating entry into our second state. Toward evening we passed a trail intersecting the AT called the Chunky Gal Trail, which led off to Chunky Gal Mountain. The Chunky Gal is a Cherokee legend, supposedly a rotund young maiden who left her disapproving family to follow her lover through these mountains. If the story is true, she may have started the journey as Chunky Gal, but she surely must have lost her plumpness on the steep slopes. Our first day in North Carolina ended in the woods close to Forest Road 71. It had been a good day. No rain and we had finished Georgia. Things were looking better and we congratulated ourselves on surviving 1 week on the trail. We went to bed early, knowing that big climbs the next day would demand all the energy we could muster. Standing Indian Mountain glared at us from an elevation of 5,498 feet. We conquered it and then moved briskly over lesser mountains and gaps. Albert Mountain, though, forced us to stop and consider our choices. The climb to the summit of Albert Mountain is rocky and strenuous. A blue blaze trail skirts around the mountain, eliminating difficult rock climbs. Blue blazes frequently mark other trails off the AT, and they are usually easier routes. However, taking a blue blaze trail means missing part of the Appalachian Trail. We decided to go up and over Albert Mountain. Up to this point, I had not made a conscious decision to hike as a purist. A purist is a hiker who passes every white blaze on the Appalachian Trail. Individual interpretations assign different levels of purity. I know this sounds silly, but with so many eccentric people on a small path for 2,176 miles, some measure of silliness will always surface. I believe this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and so, when faced with blue blazes, my own stubborn standards demanded that I hike as a purist. My interpretation of purist became this: pass every white blaze with my full pack with no slack packing. Some hikers choose to slack pack when they want credit for hiking the miles but do not want to carry full packs over difficult terrain. At many hostels, hikers ask someone to drive them ahead 15 or 20 miles and then hike back to the hostel wearing only a light day pack. Obviously, carrying less weight means you can cover more miles. This also gives a hiker just a little more time at the hostel, which is almost always an enjoyable and sociable place. I was separated from several likeable hiking partners because of their slack-backing habits. For the next hour, we scrambled up a steep, rocky slope, grabbing roots to pull ourselves upwards. The almost vertical ascent would have been a strenuous climb without a backpack, but that extra 35 pounds hanging on my back made this the most difficult climb I had experienced. When we arrived at last at the summit, a spectacular view spread before us. We climbed a fire tower to look back at the mountains we had already crossed and forward at what lay ahead. Most of the trail was lined with rhododendron bushes, and many places we walked through a tunnel of green. I can imagine how beautiful this would be later in the spring when all those bushes burst into flower. I camped that night under a large tree surrounded by a wall of rhododendron bushes. The next morning we hiked 1 mile and then celebrated a landmark. 100 miles. If I did this 21 more times, I could go home. Studying my Through Hiker's Handbook, I realised we were only 9 miles from Winding Stair Gap. There, a state road crossing the AT would take us 10 miles east to Franklin, North Carolina. Franklin was known as a hiker's town, mostly through the efforts of Ron Haven. This was a side trip we all wanted to make. Ron Haven runs several motels in Franklin, and his short yellow bus shuttles hikers between the Appalachian Trail and the town several times a day. Haven's knowledge and service are a valuable resource for AT hikers. His motels offer great rates, and his yellow bus taxis hikers around town to the outfitter, the grocery, or the post office. Hikers take this opportunity to resupply or get a night's rest in a motel. Early in the day I found a spot with cell service and called Haven's Budget Inn. Ron himself answered. I'll be at Winding Stair Gap in the parking area at 11. I'm returning some other hikers to the trail and I'll see you then, he said. Fortunately, trail conditions were good and climbs a few, so we knocked off those 9 miles quickly, reaching speeds of 3 miles per hour. At Winding Stair Gap, we descended a series of log steps to a parking lot, and just minutes later the bus pulled in. It was a reunion of sorts between hikers coming off the trail and those who had spent the previous night in Franklin. Every day, hikers reconnect with others they have met somewhere before on the trail. As Ron's bus emptied, I recognised several people I'd hiked with on previous days, and I saw a few new faces I would meet again later on the path north. It was a friendly meet and greet and information exchange with my new hiker community. "Let's go," boomed Ron in his southern drawl, and we boarded the bus while others returned to the trail. Immediately, the stories started. Ron is an entertaining storyteller, and his tales about Franklin's history and people had us laughing all the way to town. Marathon Man, Sailor, and I agreed to split the cost of a room. For very little money, we had 2 beds, a hot shower, and laundry facilities. Marathon Man insisted on sleeping on the floor. Even if another bed had been available, he preferred the floor. We took a short walk to an AYCE barbecue joint where we did considerable damage. Later in the evening, Ron drove us to the outfitter and a grocery store. When he dropped us off at the motel, he told us that the next morning, First Baptist Church was serving a free hiker breakfast for anyone interested. A van would stop by the motel to pick us up. Could it get any better than this? We were dry, our clothes were clean, and in the morning we'd have a free breakfast. In our room, I slipped under clean sheets. In the few moments before sleep, I realised a new, growing sense of freedom. Like my extra 20 pounds that were fast disappearing, I'd carried the stresses of my old life onto the trail with me. Now they too were slowly melting away.